Okay, Kevin Owocki, who is founder of Gitcoin and also a author of the GreenPill and Impact DAOs. I'm so excited to have you here in this conversation, man. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, so glad to be here. Really excited for the chat.
Okay, let's start from the very top. What is the GreenPill and why should I take
Yeah, so I mean, it's up to you whether or not you want to take it or not. But the green
it?
pill is a story of how crypto can regenerate the world. So basically, how do we build a more solar punk world, a world in which we've solved our contemporary challenges with sustainability? And I believe that crypto can be sort of a shelling point for the hopeful, a way to build more information age institutions that deliver funding to everyday people and help support our commons. And, we've got this programmable substrate for human coordination in these blockchains. What if we could use it to create more coordination and solve coordination failures? So that's the idea behind GreenPill, the book. And I'm the founder of Gitcoin, which has delivered $63 million worth of funding for open source software projects for our digital infrastructure. So we're actually putting these ideas into practice at Gitcoin. The book is just kind of to educate people about how they can put it into practice in their own projects.
I actually did my first Gitcoin grant today, this morning,
Yes,
and
you did
was
it.
excited to see the kind of leverage that happened there with my $100 and how far that went, which was pretty cool. Can you explain kind of quadratic funding and how there is a kind of multiplier on when people give?
Basically, Gitcoin grants is built on top of this thing called quadratic funding, which sounds scary, but it's actually very simple. It is a way of matching contributions from the crowd with a pot of matching funds. And so every quarter on Gitcoin grants, we have $3 million that we're giving away, and we're matching contributions from the crowd. And basically, the way quadratic funding works is that it matches based off of the number of contributions as opposed to the amount funded. So Kyle, if you had a grant that raised $100 from 100 contributors and I had a grant that raised $100 from one contributor, you would actually get 99% of the matching pool because you're supported by a broader base of contributors.
Hmm.
And why this is
Hmm.
really powerful is that even a dollar contribution can be matched with 10, hundreds, or sometimes even $1,000 worth of contribution from the matching pool because of the quadratic funding formula. So this is a way of pushing grants programs from a central power broker, a central grant administrator who decides about your application, to your peers in the ecosystem. Gitcoin grants is a proxy for how many people in the Web3 ecosystem respect your project. And so it's a more democratic way of funding grants in your ecosystem. So that's Gitcoin grants. Grants Round 14 is going on from now until June 23rd. And so if you want to contribute to Web3 projects that are doing public good, you can go to gitcoin.co/grants and check them out there.
Okay, help me understand your memes because I've been listening to a lot of the work you've been putting out, and it seems that there are a few memes out there. As far as I can count, I've got the Green Pill, Regen, Solar Punk, maybe Lunar Punk, and yeah, and then the Green Pill, which we already talked about.
Yeah. My marketing guy wants me to stick to one meme, but there's just so many out there, so I
Well,
can't really
differentiate
stick
for
to
us.
one.
Help us understand what the difference is.
Yeah, I mean they're all composite parts of a different of a similar memeplex. So basically, regenerative means a system that increases in its resource capacity over time. The solar punk is like an art movement that describes a world in which we've solved our contemporary problems with coordination failure and climate. And so a solar punk world is a more regenerative world. There's a meme of lunar punk, which is basically actually a critique of solar punk. It's the solar punk world, but it's more localized and more focused on privacy preservation in funding our public goods. There is a couple memes about public goods, which basically public goods are the kind of things that we really depend on as a society, but we can't buy. And an example of that is like open source software, which provides $400 billion per year in economic value. Every time I build a new website, I don't build a new database server, a new web server. I just fork open source software in order to do it. but there's actually no business model for open source software. And so part of what Gitcoin's trying to do is correct that asymmetry between the value created by open source and the value that open source software developers are able to be captured. So yeah, regen and public goods and solarpunk is all part of this meme of supporting the commons and supporting the infrastructure that we all rely on, but that no one really funds. So yeah, that's kind of the idea of how they all fit together.
And when you use the word commons, are you referring to it in the tragedy of the commons sense?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. You talk a lot about coordination. What does that word mean to you? It seems like central to what your thesis is.
Yeah, so basically, coordination is how a group of individuals meets their shared needs as a group as small as a family, or us as humanity. How do we coordinate around our shared needs? And a coordination failure is when any member of that group would not choose to have their shared needs not being met, but for lack of a better coordination mechanism, that problem persists. So, like an example of this is like climate change, for example. So basically, I might fly across the world in a couple months to go to some business conference. We all move around in cars and consume from things that externalize carbon to the world because we need to meet our individual needs. And as a shared need, as humanity, we don't really want to be increasing the carbon and the heat of the planet. But because we don't have a good coordination mechanism for solving this global coordination failure, then basically we're in a situation in which that coordination failure persists. So one of the things that I think is really promising about Web3 is that nation states have traditionally supported our public good, have supported our commons, but there's no global coordination substrate for humanity other than maybe the UN, which is sort of patched onto the nation state system. And I think that one of the really powerful things might be to build carbon markets on Ethereum and Web3, which is a global substrate for human coordination, global, transparent, immutable, and programmable place to build coordination games that can solve these problems. And I'm really heartened to see that there's members of the Web3 ecosystem that are offsetting their own carbon impact. We're moving to proof of stake, which is going to be almost carbon neutral, and then we can build carbon credit systems into blockchains, which will allow us to pay down our climate debt over time. So I think that Ethereum is a really great place to build coordination games that allow us to coordinate around our shared needs. And if you believe it's all coordination, and it always has been, like me, then hopefully you'll take the green pill and start building those things as well.
The current system of kind of like meeting those commons, you kind of have government and you have the philanthropic sector, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is, why are those answers not sufficient, and how can impact DAOs be a more sufficient answer to solving for these problems?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're still discovering the answer to that first question, but I do know that we keep on having climate summits and the carbon number go up in the atmosphere. I do know that we keep talking about open source sustainability, but we continue to see hacks like Heartbleed and other issues with insecure and brittle digital infrastructure. And cyber attacks are only increasing in the 21st century. So, I don't know exactly why nation states and their public goods infrastructures have failed to support our global coordination failures. I have a suspicion that it has to do with the fact that our digital infrastructure is out of sight and out of mind. You see a pothole in your street in front of you, and that's pretty visible. And I think that lends to it being solved. But with our digital infrastructure, there's a digital literacy gap, and there is an out of sight, out of mind problem with those things. And so I think that the book is called How Crypto Could Regenerate the World, and I want to be, I know I'm on this podcast to talk about that thesis, but I don't want to really represent that it's doing it in any meaningful way at scale yet. I just think that there's a foundation upon which we could build in order to solve those problems, and it's because of the properties that blockchains give us. They're transparent, which means that I don't have to be someone working at the Fed in order to engineer an economy that can solve these coordination failures. They're immutable, which means that they aren't tamperable by anyone across the world. They are global, which means that someone who's as privileged as me to be living in the United States as a middle-class white white guy has the same access as someone all the way across the world that has internet access. They're programmable, which basically means that you can build trustless games on top of them. So basically, I see that impact DAOs, I think that they have the ability to bring more transparency and a little bit more efficacy to the work that NGOs and nation states are already doing. And I think that, you know, these global coordination failures are systemic risks to humanity, and we should throw everything we got at them. So it's a yes and argument to bringing them to help NGOs and governments solving these problems, not an either or problem, in my opinion. So this is a very nascent seed stage movement, and it's just growing. And I want to be pouring fertilizer on the garden and make sure that these impact DAOs can grow and help more people.
Yeah, and how are you defining an impact DAO?
Basically defining it as any DAO or any Web3 project that has a positive externality on the world. So there's a couple impact DAOs that I can tell you about if you're interested in talking at the object level.
Sure. Go for it.
Yeah, so really excited about KlimaDAO, which is a project that's tokenizing carbon credits and then basically allowing Web3 projects to offset their carbon emissions. And I think that what gets really exciting when you've got tokenized carbon credits, and we can start to take flows from blockchain-based systems and just have them go into these carbon credit systems, continually pay off the carbon impact of these blockchain systems. And when ETH moves to proof of stake in hopefully Q4 of this year, we're going to have 99.95% less carbon emissions from blockchain-based systems. And so I could see an ecosystem in which Web3 is actually carbon negative. And I think that would be really strong. So KlimaDAO is one impact DAO I'm excited about. Another impact DAO I'm excited about is Proof of Humanity, which basically maintains a registry of unique humans on the Ethereum blockchain and then streams UBI to them. And UBI is an idea that people have been talking about for quite a while now, and it gives people a stable income through which they can go pursue their needs. And I think it's really cool that 13,000 different people across the planet are on the Proof of Humanity registry and receiving UBI. There's actually some people in Latin America that live off of UBI. So I think that that's actually having real object level impact on people. And then the third one is Gitcoin. I don't like to talk my buck too much, but we've delivered $62 million worth of funding to open source software. Now, in a world in which open source software is delivering $400 billion per year in economic value, we've got like 3 or 4 orders of magnitude of growth before we're really having a systemic impact on open source. But you still can't deny that $62 million worth of funding for open source software developers is significant. So KlimaDAO, Proof of Humanity, and Gitcoin are 3 examples of impact DAOs that are out there today. But we've actually done a survey and found on the order of 100 different projects that are trying to launch impact DAOs and are somewhere between the idea and seed stage execution stage.
That's awesome. I'd like to back up for a second. Since you ended on Gitcoin, I'd love to kind of understand a little bit about your journey into Web3 and how you ended up with Gitcoin as your project.
Yeah, totally. So basically, I have been a software engineer / lead engineer at various startups over the last 12 years during my career as a technologist. And I've hired about 45 software engineers during that time. During that time, I learned 2 things about Web2 era startups. One is that a lot of recruiters are just buying $100 a month LinkedIn subscriptions and then selling those engineers to me for $30,000 placement fees. So could we disintermediate recruiters is idea number 1. Number 2 is open source software is at the heart of everything that we ever build in software. And the people who are building open source software don't have a way of getting paid for their open source software that they're doing. So Gitcoin, basically what we want to do is we want to be the rails through which this $1 trillion financial system, actually it might be lower than 1 trillion now since the market is doing poorly this week, but there's $1 trillion worth of capital in the open source financial system. All of the money that used to go to some back office on Wall Street in that financial system is now going to open source. So Gitcoin wanted to just be a conduit through which open source software developers could get coins, pun intended, for their work in open source. And so I started Gitcoin in 2017 with some of the money that I had made in crypto, and luckily it took off. There are now 350,000 software developers earning coins on Gitcoin, and everyone in the ecosystem needs software developers. So we've kind of just become an aggregator of software developers, and that's how I got into the Web3 space. But it's all been for me about building and trying to provide value to people that are working in the ecosystem. It just warms my heart when I meet someone at an Ethereum conference and they say that we opened up a door for them, or they survived a hard time in their life because of some money that they made on Gitcoin. It's really powerful to have that kind of object level impact on people in the ecosystem.
In a world where Gitcoin is maximally successful, what does that look like?
I love that question. That's actually a
Do
question
you?
I ask people on my own podcast.
Yeah.
So I would like to create a world in which impact DAOs augment every income on the planet. So an impact DAO is any Web3 project that has positive externalities for the world. So what that world looks like is that if we can augment every income on the planet, then basically what we can do is not only give people the means to survive, to pay their bills, to pay their rent, to put food on the table in their everyday lives. But if these are impact DAOs that are augmenting every income on the planet, then hopefully we're creating a systemic incentive to support your commons. Whether your commons is your local commons doing trash pickup or repairing things in your local community, or the global commons, things like digital infrastructure and global public goods. So basically, Gitcoin is like kind of like a meta coordinator of which impact DAOs in the ecosystem are getting funding via Gitcoin grants. In a world in which we're maximally successful, these impact DAOs have been so successful that they're augmenting every income on the planet. So I do think that Web3 has the potential to do that much good for the world. But for that to happen, we have to have a flow of capital and talent into impact DAOs and into projects that are doing regenerative stuff. And Gitcoin's just kind of beating that drum of making sure that talent and capital can find those impact DAOs.
Okay, so you've been a leader kind of in the Web 2 world and in the Web 3 world. I've heard you talk a little bit about this, these differences of leadership style from command and control to sense and respond. And I'd love to kind of like, a lot of our listeners and readers are founders themselves. So I'd love for you to kind of give some feedback on how leadership looks different and how these models are different in Web 2 and Web 3.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I do think that I'm a pragmatist at heart, and I think you should use the right leadership style for the environment that you're in. I have noticed that corporations and hierarchies are really good at moving strongly in one direction. You know, the boss says do X, and then everyone falls in line and marshals their resources around X. And I think that that's worked really well for a lot of years. The corporate model invented around the Dutch East India Company times, hundreds of years ago, has taken us pretty far. But in the internet, in which you've got a complex world and in which sometimes you have to localize decision making to the front lines if you're going to deal with the complex world. And so a better way of thinking about leadership in a networked age in which things are moving really quickly is as a network. And what networks can do is they can sense and respond really well to local conditions on the ground. So you like localize control down to people who are actually on the ground to decide what they want to do. And then you have these like pods of accountability that can kind of roll up either into a network or roll peer-to-peer with each other. And I think that that's a really powerful primitive, and you should use whatever primitive is the best one for you in that ecosystem. So what I do, which is very much involved in winning the hearts and minds of software developers, and I think a network model is a little bit better. And everything at Gitcoin has always been oriented around our mission of building and supporting open source software and public goods. And one nice thing is I think that really speaks to the hearts and minds of a lot of software developers and designers out there. And in a network model in which they're building software in a world that's rapidly changing, that's been sort of an effective way of growing Gitcoin. But to be clear, we don't have it all figured out right now. We're actually in the middle of dissolving Gitcoin grants as a company and moving the Gitcoin grants ecosystem into a DAO that's governed by its community. And it's very much something there's not a formula for. So I don't know, have me back on in 2024. And if we're successful, then I'll probably have some principles of leadership to share at that point.
Last question here. What do you wish you knew as an early Web3 founder that you if you could like reverse time, or maybe a better way to think about it is, what advice would you give to kind of early stage Web3 founders?
Yeah. Well, I built Gitcoin as a centralized monolithic technology back in 2017. And now that we're trying to become a DAO where the idea is to become decentralized and modular, I certainly wish I had not built it in the way I did back in 2017. But, I think that, people should build DAOs if they want to build a network and if that's the right market that they're in, and they should build companies if that's what's right for their organization. So that's not really universally applicable to your audience. Another thing that I wish I had done differently is that in 2015, I bought a bunch of ETH at 70 cents, and then it went up to $1, and I was like, sweet, free mountain bike. And I sold it all and I bought a mountain bike, and my friends know that as my $10 million mountain bike. So
That's a very nice mountain bike.
yeah, smart enough to buy early, but not smart enough to hold, I think is my mantra. And so I wish I'd done that differently. But
Yeah.
it's been I'm
Now, hey,
very
now's a good time for that advice.
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think I might go for a bike ride after this and go enjoy
Yeah.
it. But I'm just very privileged to be working on what I'm working on, and I feel very blessed to be surrounded by a network of like-minded individuals who are just building and weathering the feast and famine nature of the blockchain ecosystem. So I'm just very lucky to be here and very thankful. There's not a lot of things I would do differently other than those two.
Well, man, hey, I appreciate your time. Where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about what you're up to?
Yeah, so if you Google Gitcoin, Google finally will not autocorrect it to Bitcoin. So we're winning. You can Google Gitcoin and you can find Gitcoin grants. We have $3 million worth of matching available on Gitcoin grants until June 23rd. So basically 10 days from the 13th, which is right now. So check out Gitcoin grants and contribute to your favorite open source projects. And then if you just Google me, I'm Kevin Owocki. I'm most active on Twitter, and you can check out some of those regenerative memes that you talked about there. So thanks so much for having me on the show. Really excited to be here.
My pleasure. Hey, have a great day. Thanks.
Cheers.